Welcome to KU Pathashala. I am Bhagya Rajeswari and I am a language instructor. Gabriel Garcia Marquez, or Gabo as he is lovingly called by the people around him, needs no introduction. Probably one of those few international writers to get translated into Malayalam quite a number of times, maybe because we have so much to relate to with his writings. His works like Love in the Time of Cholera, 100 Years of Solitude, and Chronicle of a Death Foretold are so popular that it's going to stand the test of time, maybe for a lot of centuries to come. But if you ask me, on a personal note, I would say it's his short stories that made me a great fan of Gabo's writings. Especially, it was when I read his short story titled Ursula's Marvelous Afternoon that I fell for his writings. But today, we are going to discuss his novel that came out in 1981 titled Chronicle of a Death Foretold. An amazing and incredible murder story. Now, why is it incredible? Why does it continue to be so popular? We'll be looking at it as we progress through today's session. Now, before I get into the plot, before I tell you the reason behind the popularity and everything, I think we should take out some time to talk about the author himself. A Colombian by birth, Marquez was actually brought up by his grandparents. So the influence his grandparents had on him was so great that it actually even shaped the writer in him. For instance, his grandfather was a colonel who was he was considered to be a Colombian hero who was highly respected in the society, a very outspoken, very frank gentleman who spoke about a lot of unfair things that were happening in the society. And similarly, his grandmother. Now, speaking about his grandmother, he says she was the one who told him, he calls both of them incredible storytellers, probably because of the way they narrated things to their grandson, not knowing that he is going to turn into a great writer someday. So talking about his grandmother, he said that she was the one who told him about supernatural things, ghosts, premonitions, omens, bad omens, good omens, a lot of things that's culturally significant. Probably one reason why we love Gabo a lot, because we in our culture also we have a lot of supernatural things. Not just in our culture, take any culture in the world, but supernatural elements have always had a place of its own. Everybody loves to talk about it, probably because of the uncertain nature of it. And that's exactly where Gabo's grandmother stands different. Because Gabo says that grandmother spoke about all these supernatural things as a very natural thing. You know, they were all irrefutable truth to her. They were ordinary. You know, they were part and parcel of her lives. There's nothing extraordinary. There is nothing supernatural about them. Along with human beings and the earth, all these things also existed according to her. Actually, when I read about this, Gabo speaking about his grandmother, that kind of changed my perspective also. Come to think about it, start thinking about supernatural beings and supernatural things as part and parcel of our lives. That just changes the way we look at a lot of things in our lives. So this had a great influence on him, his grandmother and her stories, especially, and I would say that it kind of reminded me of Aidihya Mala, a book that most of the Malayalis grew up reading about, and we know a lot of supernatural elements come out in Aidihya Mala as well. So how important they are to us. Another reason why we love Gabo so much, maybe like I said, we find it very easy to relate to his writings. So his grandmother was a very strong influence on his writings. Probably the roots of Macondo, the fictitious place that Marquez created in his novel, in his epic novel, I would say, 100 Years of Solitude, probably that was shaping up within him as he was listening to her narrations, as he was listening to her narratives of the supernatural elements. Macondo is a fictitious place he created, just like R.K. Narayan created Malgudi for us. It could also be these narratives on supernatural elements, that was these narratives that were part of the Latin American culture that inspired him to incorporate the technique of magical realism. Now, magical realism brings Gabo's picture to everybody's minds, because though it was not him who coined the term, but it was definitely Gabo who popularized the use of this technique, and his use of technique went on to influence a number of writers that came in the following generations. So this magical realism is nothing it's nothing but the supernatural that blends with the natural familiar world. There is a thin line separating between them. It's almost a blur. You cannot actually make out which is supernatural, which is natural. So that actually reminds us of how his grandmother, his grandmother, the storyteller that she was, because like he says that how ordinary all these supernatural things were for her. Now, Gabo was a master at magical realism, and this is particularly evident in his epic, this incredible novel 100 Years of Solitude, where he creates a fictitious town also called Macondo. Like I mentioned, it was a way of revealing to the world, through magical realism, he was trying to reveal to the world that supernatural is not anything new or invented. It's something that's discovered because it's already existing among us. Now, for the fact that whether you will find magical realism in Chronicle of a Death Foretold, it's slightly confusing, because there are points, there are junctures where you would come across magical realism. For instance, when the novella begins, you see that Santiago was sleeping and he's dreaming, and he dreams that he was actually walking through a beautiful grove of timber trees, and there was cool breeze and everything, and he was just, for an instant, he's extremely happy. He experiences that joy, that happiness, but the next moment he wakes up and he thinks that he's covered in bird shit. Now that kind of it's quite whimsical, it's weird. So was that some kind of a premonition? Was that some kind of an omen, And his mother also, Santiago's mother, is another character that appears in the novella. She is somebody who keeps interpreting the symbols that they get. So symbols, omens and everything, these sort of premonitions are part of the Latin American culture. So this is like Gabo himself says, surrealism is something that you will find in the streets of Latin America. It's as common as that. So he's so he says that you shouldn't be surprised if you find magical realism in his work, because it's very common. And hence, in Chronicle of a Death Foretold, there are these junctures, there are these points where one might come across magical realism, but will not find it as much as you find in 100 Years of Solitude. Because at the end of the day, Chronicle of a Death Foretold is a sort of a pseudo-investigative story, where we have a narrator, where we'll be looking at the deeper details as we discuss the plot very soon. You have a narrator, and who's trying to reconstruct a murder. So it's more factual, it's more to the point, and it's more, I would say, scientific also in its reconstruction in the structure of the novella. So Gabo became a law student just to fulfill his father's ambition. He was never much into law, so he dropped out after a point of time, following journalism as a career. Now the technique, why I mentioned that he followed journalism, not just to mention that he was a journalist by profession and he continued to be a journalist, a very outspoken journalist at that, not just that, this journalistic skills actually comes into, you'll be able to find that in his writing also, especially the novel that we'll be discussing today, Chronicle of a Death Foretold. It's kind of a journalistic, it's a sort of a detective, investigative kind of a story, but very different from the usual detective stories that we all are familiar with. So we'll be coming to that. Now, the 1981 novel, which is Chronicle of a Death Foretold, the very interesting fact about this novel is that it's a murder mystery. Okay, it's a murder mystery, but everything is revealed right at the outset of the novella. Everything is revealed. Everybody knows who got murdered, who got murdered, and who murdered him. Everything. Why was he murdered? Everything is out there in the plain, broad daylight. But there are no spoilers to be given. Even if I give you the deeper details of the plot, you will be able to read it as fresh as a very fresh, a very new story. And that's the amazing craft this man had. So set in a small Colombian coastal town, the story unfolds around the 1950s. Okay, that's a backdrop of the plot. And it is an incredible tale of a reconstruction of a murder 27 years after it happened. So you have a narrator coming into the story who remains unnamed till the end of the story, okay? A narrator coming in, he could be that investigative journalist, he could be that detective. He has come in to reconstruct, to understand what exactly happened on the day of the murder. Now this man comes in after 27 years of after the actual murder took place. Now who was murdered? The protagonist of this story is Santiago Naza, a 21-year-old young, handsome man. He was killed, and he was killed for a reason. You know, what was the reason and who killed him? Now the narrator comes in and tries to find out why was Santiago killed, and how was he killed, and why didn't anybody do something in order to stop the murder? A lot of things. So the narrator tries to collect as much information possible from a lot of people out there, because what is pretty interesting about this murder is that everybody knew that a murder was going to take place, and nobody did anything to stop it. So these are things that kind of, gives you a jolt. You are surprised, you are shocked, there is a jolt. A lot of things, that you experience as you read this novella. That's what this novella offers you. The experience of reading this novella, that's what it exactly offers you. So here is what happened. Santiago Naza is a handsome young man of an Arab descent. It was the day of the wedding of Angela Vicario. Okay, she's a young woman who was getting married, and the wedding was between Angela and Bayardo San Roman. It was a festive mood in the town. Everybody took part in it. Santiago took part in the celebrations, and he came back home. But immediately after the wedding, actually a few hours after the wedding, Angela is sent back home after Bayardo finds out that she is not a virgin. Now, in the Latin American culture, not just in the Latin American culture, how important the virginity, the concept of virginity that lies with the woman, the concept of honor, the concept of, bringing the dishonor to the family, how sensitive these issues are. So she's brought back, she's sent back to her place after finding out that she's not a virgin, and she's forced to take the name of the man who defiled her honor. And she takes the name of Santiago Naza. Now, she has twin brothers, Angela has twin brothers, who decides to murder this man because he defiled the honor of the family. They come out in the public and announce that they're going to murder this man. Everybody comes to know about the plan. Everybody is aware of the fact that he's going to get murdered. Some believes them, some does not. And what happens is, some of them tries to reach Santiago, trying to pass on the information about a coming attack. But nobody is able to access him, and Santiago is, just getting back home after the wedding, after the celebration, unaware of what the future has for him. Nobody is able to save Santiago till the end. Finally, he gets killed in plain, broad daylight. People who knew about it, people who were aware of it, were not able to let him know about what exactly was going to happen, and Santiago gets killed. Now, what makes this novella so special and so different is the constant moving back, the movement back and forth in the narration. The narrator comes with a lot of questions, because this is a tale of reconstruction. The murder has already happened, and he is collecting information from the witnesses of that time, and he understands that why he was killed, who killed him, but why didn't anybody do anything to stop the murder? Now, he gets killed, and as it was after Santiago gets killed, the twin brothers are sent to prison. Bayardo leaves the place after getting disappointed from the wedding. Bayardo San Roman leaves the place, and the twin brothers gets they're imprisoned, and Angela falls in love with Bayardo, and she sends him letters for 17 years. She sends him letters for 17 years. Her family, the entire family shifts to another place because they are looked down upon now in their own place. So say they shift to another city, from where Angela writes to Bayardo for 17 years without receiving a single reply. And Bayardo returns in the end. He returns in the end after 17 years, and he has letters that Angela had sent him for the past 17 years, and not a single letter was opened. So he brings back all those unopened letters to meet Angela. That's how the story ends. But also at the same time, he leaves us, the narrator leaves us slightly, alarmed. So was Santiago guilty? Was he innocent? We don't know. And was he aware of what was coming for him? Was he aware of, an impending attack from them? What exactly, was there any sort of a justice that was served? A lot of questions that leave us baffled, slightly baffled, and also, a lot of things that is quite thought-provoking. That's how the story ends. I can reveal the deeper details of the story, but still, there will be no spoilers. Like I said, it's a murder mystery, and but very unusual murder mystery, because from in a usual murder mystery, you don't know when the murder is going to happen, who's going to murder the victim. No such details are revealed right at the outset. But here we have a novella. It's a very short. It's a novella actually. It's not a very long novel. Also, it's very small book. Right at the outset, you know that Santiago Nazar is killed, and you also know that he is the protagonist. Now you know who gets killed, and then in the next few pages you know that who kills him, and then in the next few pages you know why he was killed. But you still remain hooked to the book, trying to analyze, so what happened. So it's like going backwards. You're going backwards. The story progresses, I would say, backwards. So this is a craft. This is a quiet and artistic way of storytelling, which I don't think only Gabo can claim to have. So a lot of questions are left unanswered as we close the novella. Now, one of the finest investigative story that will leave you spellbound, despite knowing the mystery right from the outset, is the single reason that I'll offer you to read this book. So it's a pretty interesting book, like all other Gabo's novels, but if you are somebody who has not ventured into Marquis' writings, I think if not for the short stories, you can start with Chronicle of a Death Foretold, because it's one of the finest books ever written. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a great time reading this novel.